Bonjour, je suis Ariane Lambert Mogiliansky et je vais vous présenter un papier qui est une application un peu de ce que nous avons entendu ce matin. Donc c'est sur la persuasion quantique, ce sont des travaux joints avec un étudiant, Adrien Calmettes, et Hervé Gonay de GetQuanty. Donc il est question d'indétermination des croyances et d'une application sur la manipulabilité des individus de ce fait. Merci.
So welcome back to this first talk, first usual talk of this conference, and that will be application. This is a joint work with a student, former student of mine, Adrien Calmettes, and Hervé Gonay, who is more in commercial applications of quantum paradigm, and myself. So I will start with a short introduction in order to put it in the context. And then actually it's Adrien who will present the experiment. So we have like 10-15 minutes about the theory, what we're talking about, and then the concrete application of this experiment. So the issue of manipulation is the most topical one today, and actively researched in psychology, political science, and more recently in economics. And in particular, there is a paper, 2011, called Quantum Persuasion by Kamenika and Gensko, that started a whole literature, and it addresses the potential for belief manipulation, which they call persuasion. And they do so in the classical information context. We found that this was a very interesting field for application of quantum cognition, and we started to investigate it theoretically first, and found that our very recent theoretical results are quite striking. The first is that we find that in a quantum non-classical uncertainty context, I will be more precise in a second, the potential for manipulation is much larger than in the classical case. And this is interesting because the result they had was interesting, but still you could see that the impact, the potential of Bayesian persuasion was really quite limited. But most interestingly, we find something very different, which is that distraction, instead of relevant information, is a powerful mean of manipulation in the quantum cognition context, while it's supposed to have no impact in the classical Bayesian one. So this prediction clearly invites for an experimental test, and that's what Adrien will present. So just a few words about choice under uncertainty and how we used to model it in economics. So in the classical context, choice under uncertainty, that is between option with uncertain consequences, is modeled as a choice among lotteries or bets over possible incomes, a little bit in the spirit of what Michel told this morning. So we developed the concept of quantum lottery, and it is also a bet on the outcome of a measurement. The difference is that the state and the events are described in the Hilbert space model. So the Hilbert space model allows for measurement, as you know, that cannot be performed simultaneously. They are incompatible. So example of such quantum lottery research, it could be a bet on the outcome of the measurement of the spin of an electron along two different axes. But what interests us here is more the behavioral aspect. Here we can think about a bet on the realization of some event evaluated subjectively when the mind exhibits quantum-like properties. And this is the way we see quantum cognition. So more precisely, quantum cognition is based on a few very building blocks. The first is a mental construct, a psychic object. And this is the first thing. In face of a complex phenomena, we consider one perspective, but not in the sense of Michel. Here it's really like perspective in the sense of property. And switch to another, but we have difficulties in combining them, in synthesizing those different perspectives. And quantum cognition proposes that those difficulties be approached in terms of the incompatibility of perspectives for the human mind in a way that reminds of complementary properties in quantum mechanics. So, and more precisely, these complementary perspectives of property, they will apply on that psychic object, which is our mental representation of the world. And this is interesting because when we take decision out of our, based on our representation of the world, not based on the world as it could be, or we don't know what it is, but it's our representation that is important. It is a psychic object, and that object can have quantum-like properties. So now I go more concretely into the subject. So we will be talking about the cognitive state, which is the equivalent of beliefs in the classical context. So we have a belief operator. It's a Hermitian non-negative operator with trace 1. So you recognize that. In physics, it is the state of the system. And that state allows predicting the probabilistic outcome of any measurement. In our context, B is interpreted as the individual cognitive state. So the trace of PB is the subjective probability for event P when the cognitive state is B. Okay. So we have a theorem in a recent publication that establishes the existence of a utility function for preferences over quantum lotteries. That means that this is a well-behaved optimization problem. Now, what is interesting is the dynamic perspective, and in choice theory, we look very much for dynamic consistency. That is, we want to have beliefs or revealed preferences that evolve such that it is consistent with stable preferences. Here I will remain with stable preferences. So suppose that a DM with ex-ante preferences given by some relation observed an event P. Her preferences should change, but how? Her preferences over uncertain alternatives. In the classical theory, the beliefs are updated according to Bayes' rule, which can be derived from this requirement of dynamic consistency. In quantum cognition, that dynamic consistency of preferences induces, and that is something we show, the von Neumann-Lüders rule for updating. So we have that if all the events commute, the updating is Bayesian, and if they do not commute, then the dynamic consistency in quantum cognition does not entail some of the very basic results in decision theory, which is called the short-things principle. And that invites for a new take on persuasion. That is how you work, how you can manipulate, work on beliefs. So what is persuasion? In persuasion, we have two players. We have a receiver and a sender. The receiver chooses an action with uncertain consequences, and to assess the value of the different actions, the receiver uses her beliefs about the state of the world, or her beliefs, to evaluate the value of the different lotteries. Receiver actions has consequences for sender. Therefore, sender may want to persuade receiver so she chooses an action that is favorable to him. So we have two actors. They are called receiver and sender because this is a communication game. This comes from the vocabulary of communication games. So the idea is that sender is interested in affecting the beliefs of receiver in order for receiver to choose an action that is better for sender. And for that purpose, sender selects a measurement. You could think of a measurement in the Bayesian persuasion. An example is like the test pharmaceutical company would choose to try to influence say the regulatory authority for a new drug. It is not exactly the information, it's an information structure. In the sense it's really a measurement, we don't know yet the outcome of the measurement. And the question in persuasion that is being asked is, how should sender select the measurement to persuade receiver to select the action he wants? So, main insight, as I mentioned already, from the theoretical analysis is that a well-designed strategy of distraction can be used to confuse receiver and achieve persuasion. Now I'll say two words. It's about the structure, the theory behind our experiments, and then I'll give the word to Adrien. So in that experiment, we are considered the choice between donating 50 euros either to the Elephant Crisis Fund or Tiger Forever project. These are both projects to support or to protect endangered species. People preferences, because when you make the choice, you have both your preferences and your beliefs that affect the choice, that determines the choice. So the preferences are captured by two features. The perspective, that is the basis, they consider the choice from, and we are interested in two different perspectives. The urgency of the cause and the honesty or trust in the organization that is managing the project. We have we have established that these two perspectives are non-compatible in people's mind in a separate experience. This is the first aspect of preferences. The second aspect is the values the player place on the project. That is, how much utility do I have if I give 50 euro to a project and to Tiger Forever, and it turns out to be very urgent. Okay, so these are the two aspects of preferences. So cognitive state here you will recognize it's a state vector, here it's B, and it can be evaluated. It means that if you would measure it in the urgency perspective, you will get the beliefs. You believe that it's urgent with certain probability, and not urgent with the complementary probability. And similarly for the trust perspective. So the utility for a person must be defined whether she has trust preferences or urgency preferences. For a trust person can be written as an operator, and this operator means that you get some value, utility value, when the state, when you believe that the state turns out to be, the organization turns out to be trustful. And similarly for urgency. So we assume that here it's very simplified and the actual reality is very different. But here we assume that the cognitive stage, which would define beliefs for the Elephant Crisis Fund and Tiger Forever, because the Y, we assume that we have the same cognitive state for both. That is, they believe equally that it's urgent for tigers as for elephants. And we have this formula, and that gives the expected utility that we can calculate out of these beliefs, or calculate taking the trace in that belief for that cognitive state. And we see that the expected utility for giving to elephant is larger than tigers. So the donation goes to the Elephant Crisis Fund. Question: can sender persuade the person to donate to tiger instead? And to distract from the trust perspective, a text on animal mass extinction is presented. So it's a general text about, you know, the difficulty for all animals. And so the belief state will be updated into one of the eigenvector of the U dimension. And here, again, to make it very simple, we take a 45-degree rotation of the trust dimension. Well, when you do this operation, you again calculate the expected value in the new after this operation. So after the distraction, you can see that you have 7 for the Elephant Crisis Fund, and Y you have 7.5. So now the Tiger project seems to give higher utility, subjective utility. And that is something that happens without the person having received any relevant information on the 2 projects. But the idea is that you switch the perspective, and then when you come back, you are different, and you evaluate the 2 projects differently. And so now he supports the Tiger Fund, and we say the fool has been fished, and that comes from a book, Fishing for Fool, of Akelöv and Schiller. So now I will present it down next.
So I'm going to present the experiment that we've conducted. So to the best of our knowledge, this study is the first to experimentally compare the impact of the general compatible and incompatible information on agent choice behavior. So as mentioned earlier, the context here is a choice for a $50 donation between 2 NGOs, Tiger Forever and the Elephant Crisis Fund. The 2 perspectives of relevance for the choice are the urgency of the cause and the honesty of the organization. So in the first experiment, we tested the incompatibility of the 2 perspectives, and in the second experiment, we tested the impact of incompatible information on the agent decision making. So the participants will be assigned into one of the 3 conditions. The first one, which is the baseline, in which there isn't any extra information. Compatible condition and the incompatible condition, and I'll explain the details later on. And we also wanted to test the prediction of classic Bayesian models against quantum-like models. Our main hypothesis being that classic Bayesian theory would fail to predict the impact of an incompatible signal. And on the contrary, the quantum theory that we followed and wanted to test will claim that the incompatible information will change one's focus and reverse the decision. So to test for the perspective incompatibility, we considered, as in several studies, that incompatible perspectives yield question order effects, because by definition the 2 perspectives induced by the question must be processed sequentially, such that the order will change the basis, and therefore observing order effects is sufficient to prove the compatibility of the perspectives. So 295 participants have been recruited through Mechanical Turk and completed an online survey. They were paid 10 cents and spent on average 17 seconds to complete the survey. So first they read a description of the rowing grass crisis in Myanmar, and then about the NGO present on the spot. And second, they had to rate the urgency of the cause and the honesty of the organization, presented in the randomized order on a scale from 1 to 5. So, for example, from not urgent to extremely urgent. The data were processed and analyzed with the data, and the data were clustered into negative and positive responses. So probability regressions were used to analyze the impact of the order on the responses, and eventually we observed that the responses significantly differ according to their order. So more specifically, the responses tended to be lower for honesty when presented first, and the responses tended to be lower for urgency when presented second. So this characteristic also indicates that the order effects that we have seen cannot be explained by other effects, such as the primacy or recency effects. The responses to urgency and honesty significantly differ with respect to the question order, so we can conclude that the two perspectives are indeed incompatible. So now, what is the impact of incompatible information on agent choices? So 1,371 participants have been recruited. They completed an online survey. They were paid from 75 cents to $1 and spent on average 1 minute and 53 seconds for the survey. On average, they were 35 years old, undergraduate level, and 42% of them have already donated to NGOs in the past 3 years. Again, the data were processed and analyzed with data, and 471 participants have been removed from the data due to missing values, a computing problem, and to balance the number of participants in each group. So the experimental design was the following. So first, the participants read an introductory message. They indicate them that they chose to contribute to a $50 donation from an NGO. Then they will read the project description in randomized order. So, for example, the description about the tigers first, and then about the elephants, or the contrary. And they are assigned into one of the three conditions, so controlled, compatible, and incompatible. They will reveal the aspect that is determinant for them for the decision, so either the urgency of the cause or the honesty of the organization. And then, depending on their condition and what they indicate as being the most determinant aspect, they will face different things. So for the control condition, they directly have the possibility to read the description again, and then make a final decision, and then give information about them, such as their age or gender, without seeing any extra information. In the compatible condition, they see an extra information that is compatible with what they indicate as being the most determinant aspect. So, for example, if one says that urgency is the most determinant aspect, then they will face extra information on global mass extinction of wildlife. And those who chose honesty will face an extra information about how dishonest can NGOs be. And of course, in the incompatible condition is the contrary. So, for example, one who say that urgency was the most determinant aspect will be exposed to the information that explain how dishonest can NGOs be. And then, as in the control condition, they have the possibility to read the first description again, and then make the final choice, and then give the information about them. It's important also to note that, as Ariane said, that none of this extra information gives any information about the tiger forever or the elephant crisis fund. They are just general information about the urgency or honesty of NGOs and organizations. So it cannot be used to help the choice into one direction or another. So at the end, 73% preferred honesty, 87% did not read the description again, and 54% voted for the elephant's crisis fund. And we can already observe a 10-point difference of people choosing elephants in the control condition and the incompatible condition. So the first regression showed that the incompatible information significantly affects the final choice, so the incompatible information significantly affects the final choice, but not the compatible information. We can also see that the choice between honesty and urgency also is significantly important in making the final choice, whereas none of the control variables had any significant impact. Nevertheless, a more thorough investigation yield more ambiguous results. So first, the incompatible information is significant only for those who chose honesty and not for those who chose urgency. Second, whereas the order of the NGO description did not affect the final decision at first, then we can see that the incompatible information is significant only for those who have been exposed to the tiger's description before the elephant one, and not the contrary. And the same goes for the choice between honesty and urgency. And third, when controlling for the interaction between all these, we can notice that the incompatible information significantly affects the final decision only for those who chose honesty and who've seen the tiger description before the elephant one. It's also important to note that although there wasn't any significant impact for those who chose urgency of the incompatible information, of those who chose urgency and seen the elephants before the tiger description, we can see a tendency for a reversal also for them. So it's not significant, but there is a certain tendency. And if we take into account this represents 50% of the sample, and if not, it's 37% of the sample. So again, none of the control variables had any impact on the final decision or the choice between honesty and urgency. And the decision to read the description again were significantly influenced by the treatment conditions, so both the compatible information and the incompatible information, by the age of the participants, and by the experience with the NGOs. So as a result, incompatible information can significantly reverse people's decision, whereas the compatible information has no effect compared to the baseline, which allows us to say that it's not merely the extra information that affects the choice, but truly the incompatibility feature of the information. So we argue that the former perspective seems to be blurred, which is in line with previous findings on preference indeterminacy, and on the fact that and on the absence of optimal synthesis of all kinds of information into one stable identity. And for that reason, the classic Bayesian prediction are challenged. In addition, distraction effects seem to be quite stable across individual because the control variables didn't have any impact. That depends very much on preferences and on the context. So in our case, there is a clear effect depending on the revealed preferences and the order of the description presented. But then why this particular case? One route for explanation is the link between the preferences and the final decision that we may have observed. But this is not a sufficient explanation. This is not very likely because we did observe dissimilar patterns in other conditions, very weak marginal effects, more balanced decision regarding the project and preferences, and a tendency to choose elephants in the control condition and tigers in the incompatible condition regardless of the preferences. So further research will be needed. Another remark is that individuals did not seem to follow conscious reasoning, so a few individuals cared about making a rational choice, but overall the responses were pretty quick and spontaneous, and expertise, meaning that the experience with NGO donation is not strong enough to moderate that distraction. So to conclude, incompatible information can switch decision makers' focus and act as a distraction, although the external validity remains to be clearly defined. And this is the first study to test the distraction effect without irrelevant tasks such as film or music, for example, that is always used in the literature so far. And the concept of incompatibility could enrich the traditional distinction between informative and uninformative signals that very often remain pretty clear. Thank you.